Now, Don, I've worked with some imaging systems before where you do create files that you can push out to these machines and you can have that operating system. And one of the things that I've always noticed is that you got to pay attention to what kind of image file you have in what certain scenario, because it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all when we do this. So we do have multiple things we have to take into consideration here.
Absolutely. And you know, if you're a network administrator and you do this type of thing for like Microsoft Windows, it's actually kind of a nightmare. It's really difficult in the Windows world because you have all the licensing and other things to deal with. In the Mac world, it's really not that hard because we don't have to worry about licensing, and the hardware drivers are all already baked into the operating system. So it actually is really easy. But one of the things we have to understand very early on is that there's 4 different types of system images that we can make, and we need to know which is the right one for our needs. Now, we're going to see all 4 of them here in this show, but let's just start off. I've got just kind of a list of them right here. The 4 different types. So the first is just a straight up disk image, and we're going to see that one in this episode. These are the little DMG files that you download from the web all over the place. If you want to install software on your machine, people can take that software and wrap it up in a DMG file, and that just stands for disk image, and you can quickly deploy that out. Now, DMG files are great for distributing software. They're not great for distributing operating systems because they're not bootable. The images that are inside of a DMG are not bootable, and if you install using one of them, they can't carry things like a recovery partition in them. So there's a few things that are not present in a DMG file. So great for distributing software, not great for setting up a new Mac from scratch, like formatting the hard drive and bringing it up from nothing. The other 3, though, give us full bootable operating systems that are installable. There's NetBoot, NetInstall, and NetRestore. And all 3 of them, they have names that are very similar, so they're super easy to mix up on the exam. You need to make sure you know the difference between each. Now, the first one is NetBoot. I mean, they all start with net, right? Which means that these images are going to be coming from a server, and we're going to install and deploy those out to our machines, which if you've got 1,000 computers, you don't want to have to go around with a USB key to every single one of them, so these are going to pull in right off the network, get thrown in, and off we go. So after that, we have to figure out what it is we're trying to do, and the name kind of gives us that hint, right? Boot, install, and restore. Now, NetBoot, the first one, this is where I need to boot a computer up directly off of the network. Now, most of us aren't really going to have to do this, but let's say, for example, you have a Mac and the hard drive has failed. If the hard drive has failed, can you boot it up? No, it's dead in the water, right? So if I want to boot it up and go, what they call it, diskless, right? You boot the system up with no hard drive in it, well, we can use NetBoot. NetBoot can reach across the network, find a bootable image, and boot your Mac up using it. Now, I know I said diskless. NetBoot actually does expect you to have a hard drive because it's caching the operating system files that it loads, unless you're making an operating system image that's so small it can fit in RAM. If you do that, it can actually run without a disk, but it does expect to have a hard drive. So if you've got a system where you have the hard drive that's suspect, maybe you think it's failing, maybe the hard drive just has a bunch of junk on it and you want to format the Mac, well, you can do that by using NetBoot. And Internet Recovery is a great example of that. When you boot your Mac up and it connects to Apple servers, and we'll see that in another episode, but when you do Internet Recovery, you're technically using NetBoot across the Internet. Now, the key thing about NetBoot is it doesn't install an operating system. You turn the computer on, it loads the OS from the network, and you're now running from that network image, and when you turn it off, it throws it all away, right? So it's a temporary operating system that's just run from the network, and that's cool if you've got something like, let's say you have a lab set up for students. I'll go back and use that school environment again, right? You get a group of high school kids on a computer, and you'd be shocked at what you end up with at the end of the day. And wallpapers are changed, and software is installed, and who knows what. So if you're using NetBoot images, you just turn that computer off and turn it back on again. And when it boots back up, it reloads that boot image, and it's back fresh and clean. So if you want a fresh and clean computer every day, NetBoot works great. But it doesn't install the OS. It's not permanent. And that's where the next one comes in, which is NetInstall. NetInstall, we can actually install OS X over the network. So you can fire up that Mac, it can reach out and grab a copy of OS X and install it. And that's a great way. If you've got a whole building full of, let's say you got a bunch of Macs all running Yosemite or Mavericks, right? And you want to upgrade to El Capitan. You could build a net install image of El Capitan, and then you can go to all those machines and install it over the network. Now, I know what you're saying. Hey, I could just log into the App Store and do it that way too, right? Well, you certainly could, right? But you'd have to log into the App Store on all those Macs. What if you don't want to log into the App Store on 1,000 Macs to be able to go and download and install it? This way we can do it without even configuring the App Store. We don't even have to use it, right? It's just done via the network. You can also use things like the Automator utility to customize that image so that it can do things like creating user accounts inside of it, or partitioning the hard drive a certain way, setting permissions. You can do all sorts of really cool things. Anything you can do in the Automator, you can do on that net install image. And then the last one is Net Restore. And Net Restore is probably the coolest one, because with Net Restore, what we do is you take one Mac and you build it up and you get it set up the exact way you want it. You install all the software you want. It can be third-party software. You can install Microsoft Office for Mac. You can install Firefox or Google Chrome, whatever browsers you want. You can set up bookmarks, get everything set up exactly the way you want it. And then you take an image of that machine and you build a Net Restore image out of it. And then you can go to those 1,000 Macs in your school or business or wherever and deploy that Net Restore image. And when you do it, all that third-party software, all that configuration comes right along with it. And now you have a brand new Mac that you just took out of the box an hour ago that's now completely set up and ready to run. That is the fastest form of provisioning Macs to get them out in your business network. And again, home users don't care about anything that I just said, right? They just go through and do it. But in a business environment where you've got a large quantity of machines, this saves you a ton of time.